This is the Zambezi River, running through the African continent. There are many rivers like this across the world, but few hold the nightmares of the Zambezi. It's considered one of the most dangerous rivers on Earth, and as you are about to find out, many people have been lured into its beautiful waters only to lose their lives. Rapid currents, hippos, and crocodiles lie in wait just underneath the surface. It's no wonder some horrifying tragedies have taken place on the Zambezi River. As usual, viewer discretion is advised. If you haven't heard about the Zambezi River, you may know of it from the beautiful Victoria Falls. Known locally as the Smoke That Thunders, Victoria Falls is the biggest waterfall in the world. Most people enjoy the thrills of the Zambezi through bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, and helicopter rides. But it's not uncommon for people to take a dip in the water. The Zambezi flows through 6 African countries. So there are areas that are safer than others. It's the 4th longest river in Africa, stretching 1,600 miles, and the largest river flowing into the Indian Ocean from the continent. The river flows through 6 countries: Zambia, Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. It plays a crucial role in the geography, ecology, and human life across this vast region. It holds the promise of beautiful scenery and attractive wildlife. It's a popular holiday destination for people from all around the world. However, sudden floods and rapid currents can turn the calm, peaceful waters into a death trap. On August 27, 2020, Elson Mathe and Thamsanqa Nkube joined a group of 25 friends. The idea was to relax on the banks of the Zambezi, watch wildlife, and swim in the cool waters. But the group didn't realize how quickly floods can pass through these calmer sections of the river. The group spent most of Thursday enjoying the charming scenery all around them. They could even hear the roar of the Victoria Falls waterfall, which is so loud you can hear it from 31 miles away. At 3:40 p.m., the peaceful day turned tragic when floodwaters rushed over the tranquil scene. This is not uncommon on the Zambezi. Since the river stretches over such a big area, rainfall further upstream can easily create rapid flood conditions further downstream. What's more, there are over 30 dams on the Zambezi. Any one of these opening their gates can cause tragedy downstream. Climate change has also created unpredictable weather patterns year after year, so it's become a guessing game for locals to figure out exactly when floods will strike. Before they could react, a massive wave crashed over the entire group. If you've ever been at a wave pool in a water park, you know the feeling of seeing a huge wave coming toward you and bracing to ride it out, getting carried away on its swells. But this was no water park, and there were no walls, no lifeguards, no carefully monitored joyride. The huge wave swept 2 of them away in its powerful grasp. Most of the group managed to scramble to safety on the embankment, gasping for breath as they watched in horror. But as they looked around, checking to make sure everyone was safe and accounted for, the awful truth hit them. Elson Mathe and Thamsanqa Nkube were nowhere to be found, swallowed by the raging waters of the flood. Panic took over the group as they shouted for help, scanning the turbulent surface for any sign of their missing companions. It soon became clear that this situation was urgent, and the search for Elson and Thamsanqa would need immediate search and rescue teams. The Rafting Association of Zimbabwe mobilized a team of expert rafters and kayakers to aid in the search. For 3 grueling days, they scoured the river, navigating the risky rapids. The friends and family of Elson and Thamsanqa held their breath, hoping for some sort of miracle. Finally, on the 4th day, the kayakers made a heart-wrenching discovery. The bodies of Elson and Thamsanqa had been located. They were floating in the waters far downstream from their swimming spot. With the help of the local villagers, the rescuers retrieved them from the water and transported them to the top of the gorge. Elson's relative, Claudius Mathe, said that despite the incident, the family was now relieved that the body had been found. It's been a very tough time having to sleep every day, not knowing whether the bodies will be found or not. Culturally, We know you can't mourn a body you haven't seen and confirm that it's really dead. And now that both have been found and retrieved, people can find closure. The terrible news spread through the town of Victoria Falls. Many of the people that live here depend on the Zambezi for its life-giving properties. Around 47 million people rely on the river for drinking water, fishing, and irrigation. On top of this, it's responsible for a huge chunk of hydroelectric power in the area. But even with the life-giving properties of the river, underestimating its deadly power could be one of the last decisions you make. You would hope this was an isolated incident, yet tragedies like this are far too common on this deadly river. There are many yearly drownings, but exact numbers can be hard to pin down. And this isn't counting those who have lost their lives to wildlife like hippos and crocodiles. You might think hippos are peaceful creatures, given their seemingly docile nature. But shockingly, they are responsible for over 500 deaths a year. This makes them one of Africa's most dangerous large mammals. They are some of the largest land mammals, weighing between 3,300 to 4,000 pounds and possessing insane strength, capable of charging at terrifying speeds of up to 19 miles per hour, despite their bulky frames. Their powerful jaws, capable of opening to 150 degrees, can exert a bite force of around 1,800 psi. That's enough to crush bones in even small boats. Their tusks, which can grow up to 20 inches, are formidable weapons used in fights and defense. Hippos are notoriously aggressive and territorial, responsible for more human deaths annually than lions or elephants. To make matters worse, they are known to flip boats over, thinking they are crocodiles. They can become aggressive when threatened, charging any unfortunate soul caught in their path. This is what happened to a guide leading a tour group down the Zambezi in April of 1994. He was a tall, strong man who was a local to the area as well as a seasoned veteran of the deadly river. As an expert guide, he led them through the most scenic routes. The trip had been wonderful, with the tour's cameras flashing all the wildlife they had come to see. Further ahead, waterbuck, impala, and buffalo grazed on the embankments. Crocodiles lounged on the sandbars. The unmistakable brown blobs of hippos rippled downstream as they grunted and chortled. Finding a moment to relax, the guide called the little group together and organized a legover. This is where the canoes are held in line by the occupants placing their feet in the adjoining canoe. They relaxed, letting the gentle current carry them downstream while they took in the sights. Without warning, their tranquil moment was shattered. An unseen hippo burst out of the reed bank beside them and crashed into the water. The guide barked the order to disengage and pushed a canoe away. But as he pulled his foot out of the water, massive jaws exploded from the water below him, clamping down on his leg. He struck at the attacker with his paddle, but the hippo's grip locked in. It dragged him out of the canoe and into the murky waters with terrifying ease. The panicked clients screamed and whipped the water with their paddles, doing anything they could to try and scare off the hippo. Amazingly, the guide surfaced, and they quickly pulled him aboard and took him to shore. What was left of his leg was now a mess. As the chaos calmed, he saw his blue paddle drifting away down the river. And he started to make sense of his injury, too gruesome to describe here. After seeking help on the south side of the river and not finding any, the shaken party huddled on the shore. Thankfully, they were discovered after dark and taken to a camp, where a casualty evacuation was arranged. Despite their swift actions to help the guide, gangrene set in that night. When surgeons finally operated, they had to remove his leg below the knee. A long road to recovery lay ahead for the guide. But this was only the first incident in a tragic turn of events, with another attack lurking just 48 hours later. Over 100 miles downstream, a fishing party made up of Alistair Gellatley, Arthur and Faye Taylor, and Clive and Brenda Kelly were enjoying a relaxing day aboard their powerboat. They were in the middle of the Zambezi River. The sun shone on the water as they made their way down the river, and they were surrounded by sunbathing crocodiles, snorting hippos, and elephants wallowing in the muddy shallows. Alistair had brought his friends on this trip to spend a long Easter weekend at a small tourist camp he was building. He had spent most of his life in the bush as a safari guide, so the animals were of no concern to him. If you don't disturb them, they won't disturb you. But little did he know that underestimating these creatures was about to change his life. This part of the wide Zambezi River, which formed the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, was usually a favored route for tourist boats. However, today, the group had it entirely to themselves. Alistair switched off the engine, allowing the boat to drift along with the swift current as they began to fish. Soon, Brenda excitedly shouted, "I've got one!" With pride, she placed the first catch of the day into the boat. Suddenly, their boat's prow reared violently from the water. A hippo had rammed it with a force that sent all 6 passengers into one corner of the boat. The boat tilted from the extra weight, and before they could regain their balance, a second powerful hit capsized the vessel. Yells filled the air as they were all thrown from the boat into the water. Arthur and Faye managed to grab Brenda, who couldn't swim, and helped her to the nearest sandbar. Meanwhile, Alistair and Clive clung to a trailing rope from the overturned boat, just managing to climb onto its hull. Shaken and assessing the dire situation, Alistair decided their best hope was to get away from the river, swim to the riverbank, and run to the safety of a nearby fishing camp. He plunged into the water and swam 300 feet to the shore. Just as he thought he was safe, he spotted an 8-foot crocodile gliding toward him. Instinct kicked in, and Alistair decided to attack in an attempt to frighten the croc off. He swam straight at the crocodile, but it disappeared into the water. He slipped underwater to look for the animal, but he was blinded by a mud cloud kicked up in the panic. He moved to clear waters and tried to assess the situation again. The next thing he saw was the 8-foot croc shooting towards him like a torpedo. It shot past him, then whipped around to get a hold of Alistair. He dropped underwater once more and came face to face with an open mouth and 2 rows of gleaming yellow-brown teeth. Its jaws clamped down on his forearm. The fight for his life had begun. Thrashing and turning, the crocodile pulled him underwater. Alistair managed to wrap his legs around the reptile, rolling with it as he tried to poke its eyes with his thumbs. The pain was agonizing, but he didn't relent. The force of his punches did little to slow the animal's assault. Finally, he forced his hand down the crocodile's throat, triggering a gag reflex that made it release him. Gasping for air, Alistair broke the surface. His right arm was severely impacted, and he had injuries all over his body. He staggered to a safer part of the riverbank and collapsed. He bound his arm with strips from his shirt and began to wait, hoping for help. He had been carried far downstream in his fight and was now completely and utterly alone. Meanwhile, as the afternoon turned to night, the rest of the party huddled on a partially submerged sandbar. They had watched Alistair's fight and seen him carried away, no doubt assuming the worst. Arthur, a seasoned outdoorsman, knew the night would bring greater danger. Crocodiles circled them, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. Arthur found a blue paddle floating in the water, so he fished it out to use as a weapon to defend himself with. Ironically, it was the very one from the previous guide's attack 2 days prior. It's pretty wild to me that the paddle that got lost in the guide's fight with the hippo ended up being the same one that very likely saved this group's life 2 days later. Arthur used the paddle to keep the predators at bay. The group spent a terrifying night fending off the assaults of the crocodiles. Down the river, Alistair lay hidden among the rocks, his wounds clumsily bandaged but throbbing with pain. He thought he was done for, with the night bringing greater dangers that would be drawn to the smell of wounded prey. What happened next likely saved Alistair's life that night. As darkness fell, he saw a buffalo bull approach. Braced for an attack, he was surprised when the animal simply grazed nearby. It may come as a surprise that buffalo are some of the most dangerous beasts you can encounter in the African wilds. Amazingly, the buffalo lay down close to him, seemingly standing guard. Throughout the night, lions roared and hyenas circled, following the scent of blood. The buffalo's presence kept them from making a meal out of Alistair, as though it were protecting the wounded man. At dawn, the buffalo rose and walked away. Feeling a bit stronger, Alistair fashioned a sling for his arm and began his trek toward camp. Hours later, he spotted Zimbabwean fishermen on the river. Too weak to shout, he waved as much as he could. They saw his distress and came to help him, quickly transporting him to their camp. After hearing about the rest of the group, they then returned to the river and rescued the others from the sandbar. First aid was given where possible, and an air rescue was arranged. The first plane experienced difficulties. Thankfully, a second plane eventually arrived, flying Alistair to Harare for surgery. Thanks to prompt medical intervention and skin grafts, Alistair's arm was saved, though he never recovered his full range of flexibility. The harrowing ordeal had ended, but the memories of that night would stay with them for the rest of their lives. At least the group made it out of this situation without the loss of any lives. The same cannot be said for the next tragic Zambezi encounter. The sun was setting over the Zambezi River on March 9, 1996, casting a golden hue over the shimmering water. Paul Templar, an experienced river tour guide, led a group of eager tourists near Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe. Templar had learned a good friend who was supposed to lead a safari down the Zambezi River had malaria, so he had agreed to take his buddy's place. I loved that stretch of the river. It was an area I know like the back of my hand. The tranquility of the scene masked the lurking dangers beneath the river's surface. Templar and his apprentice guide Evans Namasango navigated their guests through the calm waters. They were completely unaware that their lives were about to be changed forever. The expedition group included 6 safari clients, 4 Air France crew members, and a German couple, alongside 3 apprentice guides and Templar himself. The group navigated the Zambezi in 3 canoes, with clients seated in the first 2 positions and a guide in the rear. Additionally, 1 apprentice guide followed in a 1-person safety kayak. Templar later said that things were going the way they were supposed to go. Everyone was having a pretty good time. Eventually, they encountered a pod of about a dozen hippos, a common sight on the Zambezi. At first, they weren't alarmed, since they were at a safe distance. However, as they drew nearer, Templar attempted to steer clear, advising, "We were getting closer and I was trying to take evasive action. The idea was, let's just paddle safely around the hippos." Leading the way, Templar's canoe navigated into a small channel, with the other 2 canoes and the kayak following. He waited for the group to catch up, but noticed that the 3rd canoe had fallen behind and strayed off course. Templar wasn't sure how this had happened. Then the attack began without warning. Suddenly there's this big thud, and I see the canoe, like the back of it, catapulted up into the air, and Evans, the guide in the back of the canoe, catapulted out of the canoe. A massive bull hippopotamus erupted from the water with great force, flipping Namasango's kayak and sending its 2 passengers tumbling into the crocodile-infested river. Panic spread like wildfire as the helpless tourists struggled to stay afloat. Templar, witnessing the chaos, paddled furiously towards Namasango to assist. As he reached a hand out for his apprentice, the water between them exploded once more. In an instant, Templar was engulfed in darkness and crushing pressure. He realized with horror that he was being swallowed by another hippopotamus. The beast's mouth was slimy and warm, reeking of rotten eggs. The pressure on his body was immense, and he struggled to comprehend the nightmare that had become his reality. The hippo's jaws clamped down with vice-like force, attempting to crush him. Templar's size saved him from being swallowed whole, but the hippo released him, only to attack again with renewed force. This time, its teeth grabbed into his arm. His lung was impacted, as was his Achilles tendon. The pain was awful. He had 38 serious bite wounds. Life force filled the water and Templar's vision began to blur. Meanwhile, his apprentice Namasango was also fighting for his life. He was using his oar to fend off the attacking hippo and protect the tourists. But he was eventually overwhelmed and disappeared into the murky depths. It was the last they saw of him alive. One of the other guides, Mike, managed to pull Templar from the water, providing first aid on the riverbank. The struggle for survival had only just begun. Templar's left arm was a mangled mess, and he needed immediate medical attention. It took 8 long hours to transport him to a hospital near Bulawayo. Throughout the grueling journey, Templar battled against shock and blood loss. When they finally arrived, doctors had no choice but to remove his left arm to save his life. Templar later recalled the horrifying incident. "I remember we were sipping on our drinks, resting, and taking in the peace and tranquility that comes with that late afternoon glow. Then there was this sickening thump. Templar saw the safari guide flying through the air as his canoe slid off the shoulders of a giant male hippopotamus. And then Templar was swallowed up to his waist by the beast. It was slimy and warm. It smelled like rotten eggs. It was a really bad day at the office. My whole world went dark and strangely quiet. You see, from my waist up, I wasn't dry, but I wasn't wet either. Not like my legs were. There was this incredible pressure crushing down on my lower back. I managed to get one hand free, and feeling around, I felt the bristles on the hippo's snout. At least now I knew where I was. I was head first, up to my waist, down the hippo's throat. Tragically, the other guide, Evans Namasango, was finally found downriver after 2 days of searching for his body. Yet another victim of the Zambezi. Templar's encounter with the rogue hippo, later named Harry, would become a chilling legend. He later wrote of his experiences in his autobiography. It's called What's Left of Me: How I Lost a Fight with a Rogue Hippo and Won My Life, offering a gripping narrative of courage and resilience. As the months passed, the story of the 1996 Zambezi River hippopotamus attack spread. These stories show us just how quickly nature can turn on us. But they are also a testament to man's will to live. How would you react if you were swallowed up to your waist by a hippo? This last incident is unlike the others, but it is certainly the worst for the sheer loss of life. In September of 2003, a makeshift ferry traveled down the Zambezi River. The ferry creaked under the heavy weight of its load. It set off from Zambia's river outpost of Kazungula, bound for Botswana. It was a routine crossing, but that evening, the vessel was burdened with more than just passengers. It was carrying a massive truck loaded with copper from the Democratic Republic of Congo, destined for South Africa. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, the ferry began its slow journey across the river. Among the passengers were women and children, mostly cross-border traders who relied on this route for their livelihoods. The beauty of the Zambezi was a sight to behold, but it was about to turn into a chaotic tragedy. Without any warning, disaster struck. The immense weight of the truck was too much for the ferry to handle. The ferry began to lose balance as the truck's weight shifted. With a terrifying groan, the vessel capsized, throwing everyone on board into the crocodile and hippo-infested waters. People yelled and struggled to stay afloat, their desperate noises attracting the sounds of the river's opportunistic predators closing in. In the ensuing chaos, 6 people managed to cling to debris. They were eventually pulled to safety, but the scene was one of utter devastation. People began to disappear beneath the surface, either carried away by the current or pulled down by unseen jaws. Local witnesses were hesitant to dive into the water to save anyone's life, fearful of the crocodiles and hippos waiting for their next meal. Back on shore, news of the disaster spread slowly. Kazungula, a remote outpost some 340 miles from Lusaka, lacked a telephone network. This meant critical delays in mounting a rescue operation. By the time help began to mobilize, precious hours had already been lost. As darkness took over the river, divers began the grim task of searching for survivors. By morning, 3 bodies had been recovered, but the fate of at least 15 others remained uncertain. The atmosphere was thick with tension and sorrow, only broken by the occasional splash as divers plunged back into the water. Matthew Ferry from the ferry operator, Engineering Services, confirmed the tragedy. The accident was caused by the truck carrying copper concentrates. When it slid off the pontoon, everyone was thrown into the river. We have confirmed 18 people dead. With no proper rescue equipment, the search was painstakingly slow. Brenda Muntemba, a spokesperson for the Zambian police, explained the dire situation. The problem we have is a lack of equipment. A crane has just been secured, but there are no life jackets and boats. Reinforcements from Botswana's Air Force and Zimbabwean police arrived to aid the rescue efforts. Yet hope was dwindling. For the families of those still missing, the wait was agonizing. As the rescue teams continued their grim task, the story of the ferry disaster spread. It was a dark reminder of the perils faced by those who depended on the river for their livelihoods. In recent months, dozens had died in similar accidents on the Zambezi. Most were victims of inadequate infrastructure and the treacherous waters that connected their communities. Many were just trying to make a living any way they could. In the end, the Zambezi claimed many lives that day. It may be known for its breathtaking beauty, but the dangers of the Zambezi are just as real. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.